The truth about the U.S. military-industrial complex. More than 60 years ago, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned people about the military-industrial complex, MIC. It is still around and reasonably. In fact, it uses up a lot more tax money and helps a lot more arms companies than it did when he warned about its unwarranted influence in his 1961 goodbye speech to the country. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're going to delve into a topic that has been a subject of intense debate and discussion. The truth about the U.S. military-industrial complex. So, let's get started. Okay, let's begin. You won't believe the numbers. The planned budget for the Pentagon and the Department of Energy's work on nuclear weapons this year is $886 billion. This is more than twice as much as Eisenhower said when prices were adjusted for inflation. More than half of the government's discretionary budget is now spent on the Pentagon. This means that important areas like education, public health, job training, and protecting the environment have to fight for what is left. Lockheed Martin got $75 billion in orders from the Pentagon in 2020. That's more than the State Department and the agency for international development's total budgets put together. It costs the same amount as the CDC's whole budget this year, just for that company's expensive and poorly performing F-35 battleplanes. According to a new study from the National Priorities Project at the Institute for Policy Studies, the average voter spends $1,087 a year on weapons companies, but only $270 on K-12 education and only $6 on electricity from green sources. The list goes on and on. In a less well-known speech called "The Chance for Peace," which he gave in April 1953, early in his first term, President Eisenhower talked about these kinds of trade-offs in this way. Each gun made, every boat launched, and every rocket fired is, in the end, a theft from people who are hungry and not fed or who are cold and not dressed. This world in arms isn't just spending cash. It pays the hard work of its workers, the smarts of its experts, and the dreams of its children. How sad that is to say at this time. Don't fall for it now. The war machine we have now is nothing like your grandfather's MIC. It gets a lot more money and gives a lot of different reasons. It has a lot more advanced ways to affect people and very different technology goals. The most significant change between Eisenhower's time and ours may be the size of the big weapons companies. Before there was a merger boom in the 1990s after the Cold War, there were dozens of big defense companies. These 5 companies are now the only ones that matter: Boeing, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. Since there aren't many companies that make planes, tanks, missile systems, and nuclear weapons, the Pentagon has less power to stop them from charging too much for goods that don't work as promised. Each year, the Big Five got more than $150 billion in contracts from the Pentagon. That's almost 20% of the entire Pentagon spending. More than half of the department's yearly budget goes to contractors, no matter how big or small. During Eisenhower's time, the Soviet Union, which was America's main enemy at the time, was used to excuse making the military bigger and staying there longer. Today's pacing threat, as the Pentagon calls it, is China. China has a lot more people, a stronger economy, and a lot more advanced technology than the Soviet Union ever did. But unlike the USSR, China's main threat to the US is not armed but economic. But, as Dan Grazier pointed out in a study for the Project on Government Oversight in December 2022, Washington's growing concern about China has led to a big rise in military threats. China hawks in Washington are upset that China has more ships in its Navy than the United States. Grazier, on the other hand, says that our Navy has a lot more weapons. The United States also has about 9 times as many operational nuclear weapons as China does. And the Pentagon spends 3 times as much on its military as China does, according to the most recent data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. But for Pentagon contractors, the fact that Washington is focusing more and more on the possibility of war with China is significant for business. The danger of China's military, whether real or imaginary, is still used to support big increases in military spending, especially on the next generation of high-tech systems, like hypersonic missiles, robotic weapons, and AI. But the past of high-tech systems like President Ronald Reagan's Star Wars missile defense system and the F-35, which could not work, does not look good for the cost or performance of new military technologies. No matter what, you can be sure that tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars will be spent on getting them built. Also, keep in mind that they are dangerous to everyone, not just enemies. In a study for the Arms Control Association, Michael Clare said, AI-enabled systems may fail in unpredictable ways, causing unintended human slaughter or an uncontrolled escalation crisis. A powerful arsenal. The mic has a lot of power, which is getting it closer and closer to $1 trillion yearly budget, even though the Pentagon is the only government body that has never passed an audit and has a never-ending list of expensive and failing weapons systems. In short, it's stealing more public money than ever before, and everyone is involved. From a vast number of politicians to a huge number of political campaigns. From a vast number of think tanks to Hollywood. Also, keep in mind that the fact that only a few mega companies make most of the guns means that each of them has more money to spend on marketing and advertising. They also have more buildings and workers to show members of Congress, often in places with a lot of political weight, to get them to vote. Yes, even more money for the weapons they want. Over the last 2 election cycles, the arms business as a whole has given more than $83 million to political candidates. Lockheed Martin has provided the most, $9.1 million, followed by Raytheon with $8 million, and Northrop Grumman with $7.7 million. It shouldn't come as a surprise that a lot of those funds are held by members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees and Military Spending Subcommittees. The 58 members of the House Armed Services Committee reported receiving an average of $79,588 from the defense sector during the 2022 election cycle. According to Taylor Giorno of Open Secrets, a group that keeps track of campaign and lobbying spending, this is 3 times the average of $26,213 that other representatives reported during the same period. Even more money has been spent on lobbying by everyone in the mic. More than $247 million in the last 2 election cycles. It takes 820 politicians to work with these funds, which is more than 1 for each member of Congress. And keep in mind that more than 2/3 of those politicians had worked at the Pentagon or in Congress before coming to work for the arms business. Through Washington's famous revolving door, they know people in government and how to get things in a complicated way, which helps keep the money coming in for more guns, tanks, ships, and weapons. A report from Senator Elizabeth Warren's D-Mass office last month said that nearly 700 former top government officials, such as generals and admirals, now work for defense companies. The study says that 91% of them became Pentagon agents. Some of them are now company board members or highly paid execs. And the rapidly moving revolving door gives present members of Congress, their staff, and Pentagon workers a strong reason to get along with those big companies, while they are still working for the government. After all, they will be able to make a lot of money lobbying after they leave government service. Also, those companies that make guns aren't just hiring people for political jobs on K Street. Also, they're giving work to almost every main street in the United States. Lockheed Martin's F-35 is the perfect example of how jobs can be used to sell a weapons system that might not be very good otherwise. There are many problems with the design that mean it might never be fully ready for battle. The Pentagon's independent testing office found more than 800 problems that need to be fixed. But the company says that its program creates at least 298,000 jobs in 48 states, even though the actual number is less than half that. The weapons business actually creates fewer jobs than it used to. But you would never know it in Washington, D.C., today. This is true even though it gets almost record amounts of government money. Stats from the National Defense Industrial Association show that there are now 1 million direct jobs in the arms industry, down from 3.2 million in the 1980s. People are now more likely to work in engineering jobs that pay better than production jobs because of outsourcing, automation, and making fewer pieces of more complicated systems. This move has cost a lot, because companies that make guns are hiring a lot of engineers and scientists. Fewer skilled people can work on pressing issues, like climate change and public health. On the other hand, it is thought that spending on infrastructure, healthcare, education, or green energy could create 40 to 100% more jobs than spending on the Pentagon. The military-industrial complex and think tanks shape the elite narrative. One of the MIC's most powerful tools is its ability to control how the most powerful people in society talk about national security problems. It does this by funding foreign policy think tanks and the analysts who work for them. These analysts are often the ones the media turns to for information about war and peace. More than 75% of the best foreign policy think tanks in the U.S. get at least some of their money from defense companies, according to a new report from the Quincy Institute. Some, like the Center for a New American Security and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, get millions of dollars from these companies every year, and then write articles and reports that mostly back the money from the defense business. Some of these think tanks even back guns made by the people who give them money. Telling you about the apparent conflicts of interest. This year's Pentagon budget request, which one scholar from the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, said was well below inflation, was criticized by others for being too high. These scholars wanted more money for weapons systems like the Long-Range Anti-Ship Missile, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, the B-21 bomber, and the Sentinel Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. What does the piece not talk about? Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, the companies that make those weapons, have given money to the AEI. That institute is a dark money think tank that doesn't say who funds it in public. However, at an event last year, a staff member said that the group gets money from both of those contractors. Unfortunately, a lot of what the mass media say comes from experts at these kinds of think tanks. They were more than 4 times more likely to be mentioned in the New York Times, Washington Post and Wall Street Journal stories about the Ukraine war, according to the upcoming Quincy Institute study. This is in contrast to those who did not receive MIC funds. If you see a think tank expert talking about war and peace, the group that employs them likely gets money from the war machine. Also, these kinds of think tanks have their version of a fast spinning door, which is why people call them holding tanks for future government leaders. The Center for a New American Security, for example, gets millions of dollars every year from defense contractors. And the Pentagon. It has also said that some of its experts and alumni have joined the Biden administration, including high-level political appointees at the CIA and the Department of Defense. The military entertainment complex, changing the story people tell. The action movie Top Gun: Maverick was such a hit with viewers that it got an amazing 99% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Its widespread popularity helped it get nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture. The Pentagon also had a great time. They worked closely with the writers and gave equipment, including jets and aircraft carriers, personnel and technical expertise. According to the Washington Post, they even had the chance to make changes to the plot. In the same way, defense companies were very important to the success of that movie. In fact, Lockheed Martin's CEO was proud that his company worked with Top Gun's producers to bring cutting-edge, future-forward technology to the big screen. Even though Top Gun: Maverick may have been the most popular military-themed movie in recent years, it's just the most recent example of Hollywood spreading military lies. Roger Stahl, a professor at the University of Georgia who studies propaganda and state violence, says that the Pentagon and the CIA have exercised direct editorial control over more than 2,500 films and TV shows. The result is an entertainment culture set up to make few anti-war movies, and dozens of blockbusters that praise the military. Writer David Sirota, who has written many times about the dangers of the military entertainment complex, said, and except for the obligatory thank you to the Pentagon in the credits, Sirota said, audiences rarely know that they may be watching propaganda paid for by the government. What will happen next with the MIC? Eisenhower first noticed and named the military-industrial complex more than 60 years ago. The complex still has an unmatched ability to taint budget and policymaking, starve funding for non-military solutions to security issues, and make war the increasingly likely solution to our nation's problems. The question is, what can be done to make it less potent over our lives, our jobs, and, in the end, the planet's future? To fight the military-industrial complex of today, you would have to remove all of its main supports, which are what gives it its power and impact. Reforming campaign finance laws. Stopping the revolving door between the weapons industry and the government. Making it more transparent how the industry funds political campaigns, think tanks, and Hollywood. And putting more money into green technology and public health jobs, instead of building more weapons systems, would help achieve these goals. The most important thing is that the general needs to be educated about the threat that China really is. This will help people see things more realistically and fight the current climate of fear. That helps the Pentagon and the extensive weapons contractors but hurts our safety and security. That would be a big job, but the alternative, an arms race, that keeps getting worse and could lead to a war that ends the world, or keeps us from dealing with existential threats. Like climate change and pandemics, it is just not acceptable. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to see more videos like this. We can all work together to learn more about global problems and make the world a better place for everyone.